Okay, good morning everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Since today is going to be near to weekend, so I think it's nice to have um, listening project rather than you have a feedback revision one. So congratulations for the groups that have already passed on how to create the research method for C. And then we are going to move now from those of instruments into how to formulate research questions and hypotheses in quantitative research. Hypothesis itself is actually a statement, it's a simple statement created by researchers, of course, not by others. And it's about the speculation, a prediction upon the outcome, upon the result of your research or experiment. So, especially for the experimental design, it must have a statement or it must have the hypothesis. But for the characteristic of research in our department, so we do not use experimentation. So it is urged to have hypothesis, but not necessarily like experimental one that is a must. So hypothesis is said to be the core of quantitative research. Now, how to generate hypothesis? Okay, so for some of you who are confused why hypothesis using E and hypothesis using I, hypothesis using E means many, means plural, while hypothesis using I is singular. So hypotheses are generated to two types, the inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning, inductive method or deductive method. Also, inductive reasoning is where you do the observation first and then you generate the hypothesis through specific theory. On the deductive one is you have the theory first and then you end up with the hypothesis to do the observation. So this is maybe the depiction of how deductive approach shall go. Deductive one means that you begin your research by reading theories and then you formulate the hypothesis and you did the survey or observation and then you will have the concluding remarks afterward to confirm. As for the inductive one, you did the observation first, so not the theory one. This mostly conducted by those of doctoral students instead of you as the undergraduate one. So observation and then you try to find out the pattern and you have tentative hypothesis which based on how you did the observation and afterwards you will conceptualize a theory. So for undergraduate one, deductive approach is highly preferable. As for the criteria of good hypothesis, it must be simple and specific, so it's not going to be very long statement or in a one paragraph statement. No, just one simple sentence and specific, and then it must be testable, and it must clearly state the expected relationship between the variables, or whether it is correlational, whether it is cross-sectional, about the difference of something. These are the examples of good and bad hypotheses. Okay, if you look at just how they formulate the statement, the length of the sentence, it's confusing because the good hypothesis seems to be longer than the bad one. But the essential thing here is that how is it testable or not? Look at this one. In the case of murder, mock juries will be more likely to convict a black defendant than a white defendant. As for the bad hypothesis, it's like a jumping conclusion. there is bias in justice system. So hypothesis that is bad is very judgmental and based on only your feeling instead of make it more logical. The next one, employees will be more productive when working under bright lights than when working under dim lights. Okay. As for the bad one, employees will work differently under different lights. Um, so it might be simple sentence, but essentially it is very what is it? It is quite broad, so it's not specific. Simple, yes, but not specific. Whereas the criteria should be simple and specific. Okay, so we move to the types of hypothesis. There are only two. The first one is null hypothesis, or hypothesis null. That is why it is written as HO or H null. A null hypothesis usually began with the word there is no, because it is null hypothesis, so it must be begun with the word no. So it's like how Islam tried to teach us you should expect less than you expect high. So there is no difference, there is no correlation between. Okay, so it might be like this. HO, HO, it states the opposite of what the experimenter or as a researcher would expect or predict. So set the opposite. So if you expect it will work, then the null hypothesis you must be start with it won't work. If you expect that something will be different, then the null hypothesis is the opposite one. So null hypothesis should be determined first after the alternative. So in the end, the final conclusion of the researcher investigator will either retain, agree to the null hypothesis, or reject the null hypothesis. So if most of quantitative researchers love to have the second one, reject the null hypothesis, because it is the one that is not expected. So null hypothesis should be begun with the word there is no, and then it says the opposite of what we expect or predict. As for the alternate hypothesis, the second type, it is a statement that suggests a potential outcome, what we expect. So null hypothesis is what we are not expecting, but alternate hypothesis is what we expect. And it has two subtypes, directional and non-directional. Directional alternate hypothesis usually begin with the word, it has words like more than or lesser, so you use comparative degree. For example, electrical engineering students will have more options in using learning strategies than civil engineering students. So it is clearly comparing something. That is why this is said like specific, very specific. As for the non-directional, since we cannot predict what will be the result, so it is simply said like there is a difference, there is a correlation that are used by. So this is for example, you may have the difference, right? We'll have more options and only there is a difference. So in this case, you might ask why non-directional seems to be bad hypothesis, right? It's simple and too wide, but as what happened in educational research, non-directional alternate hypotheses are widely used instead of the directional ones. So how to generate hypothesis? First, you need to determine the variable of your research. I think we have done that. And then determine the theory that we are going to employ. variable in quantitative research used to be embedded in the theory, and then we determine the null hypothesis and then the alternate one and determine the research questions. So how does it look like? Um, for example, the title could be a cross-sectional survey on the use of language learning strategies between electrical engineering and civil engineering students in vocational high school. And then the theory or the variable, because all of them are inseparable, is language learning strategies. So actually this variable has only one, this title has only one variable, but it has two populations. So the hypothesis could be the null one, there is no difference because we expect to be different. Because we expect to be different, then the alternative will be like this, there is a difference, and the null hypothesis, there is no difference. So that the instrument that is used is SIL 7.0 from Oxford, and then the research question will be, is there a difference? As for the research objectives will be to describe whether, yeah, so if you have a correlational study, so it is the same, is there a correlation? Okay, so correlational and then cross-sectional, those of that use two variables are going to look like this. But how about the students who have only one variable of their survey study? A good news is that it does not require hypothesis because it has an aim to only identify and mapping. So that is why the research question will be what are the types of, and then how are the mapping of. If you ever heard that how question should not be in quantitative research, it is wrong, because it will be very weird if you put that what are the mapping of students motivation, what are students motivation, it asks the definition. Instead you're going to explain something to develop phenomenon. So it is very okay to use how, as long as it is rational. So that the research objective will be similar. This one to describe, this is also to describe or to identify. Well, I think that's all.